I don't enjoy you, and you know you don't enjoy.
Hi, this is AF Charters for A Critical State. Today you join us in the city-state of the City of London. You heard correctly. This is a city-state. It's not part of the UK in the proper jurisdiction, okay? So we're going to be talking today to Dom and Vin from Standing in Commerce. So let's go to the scene of the Fire of London, which is what the monument here commemorates. This is a major historical event that happened in 1666, and there's a lot of hidden history that you need to know about this. So here I am walking into Pudding Lane. This is a really historic place, and I'm joined by a couple of gentlemen who are going to fill us in on some of the history. So I have Dr. Dominic here from Standing in Commerce, nice to meet you, and I have Vincent, who's also going to be filling us in on the judicial system and law. So first of all, we're going to move over to Dominic because he's studied in great detail what has been happening here in London in 1666. And I don't mean just what was happening here in Pudding Lane, but events that were happening off camera, shall we say, in Westminster.
We like the idea of making it better, but we just can't be bothered. So what more can we do? Yes, we like the idea of making it better, but we just can't be bothered.
So Dominic, Pudding Lane, the Great Fire of London, 1666. We learn about this in our school history. Some of us that live close enough, like myself, will be lucky enough to do a trip to come and see Pudding Lane, where the bakery was set light. We'd hear about the Great Plague and how it was a terrible event.
Absolutely. But just like when Rome burned, when London burned, there were great changes happening over in Parliament, not so far from here.
What kind of changes were those?
Well, the subrogation of men and women's rights.
In what way were they subrogated?
Well, there was an act passed. It's like when Rome burned, when London burned, there were great changes happening over in Parliament, not so far from here.
What kind of changes were those?
Well, the subrogation of men and women's rights.
In what way were they subrogated?
Well, there was an act passed whilst London was burning.
Right. So literally while the fire is burning down here?
Well, it takes a long time to bring a statute to the books.
Right.
It takes a lot of architecture and a lot of thinking by the judiciary, and then to debate it through Parliament.
Sure.
And obviously the Black Death was carried on for quite some time here.
Certainly.
But the question I would ask is, what was the Cesti KV Act of 1666 being put on the statute books whilst, you know, the proverbial hell was happening on the streets of London?
Now, for those of you who are not quite sure what this act is that Dominic has just talked about, we will actually be putting links on the website and probably bringing up information about this at the end of the show. So don't worry if you can't follow the intricate detail. It's much more important to understand the bigger picture. So Dominic, this Cesti Act, what did it actually say?
Well, after several hundred readings, we finally came to the conclusion that it would appear that all of the citizens, all the men and women of the United Kingdom were declared dead and lost beyond the seas.
What does that mean then?
Well, the state took everybody and everybody's property into trust, and the state became the trustee husband behind all the and owns all the titles to both the people and their property.
So the state took control by saying everyone is dead,
and until a living man or woman comes back and claims their titles, and when they do prove that they are alive, then the titles can be revested and they can claim for damages.
Okay, so essentially where we are right now is that still today here in 2009, that legally speaking, you and I, on camera, we are dead.
Absolutely, because you didn't claim your titles back after 7 years, as it says in the statutes.
Wait a minute, so 7 years after 1666?
7 years after you were born.
Oh, really? So I have time from when I'm born to when I'm 7 to claim?
Yes. Otherwise, you are dead beyond reasonable doubt.
Okay.
And therefore, the state takes your property and your body into trust.
That's fascinating. And this all came about as a result of the Great Fire?
Well, it could be a bit of a smokescreen.
Right. That's a nice metaphor. So the Sesticate Act fundamentally underlines that you or I are dead. Now, does that have anything to do with when we go to court and we're not allowed to represent ourselves?
Absolutely. We're starting to see the beginning of the creation of a legal fiction of a dead entity.
What is a legal fiction?
Is a construct on paper. So when you get a bill or a summons from a court, it's always in capital letters.
Right.
Now, last time I went into a graveyard, all of the on all the graves, all the names, all the men and women were in capital letters.
Right.
That's mortmain, probate, death.
Right.
So the state or the corporation that writes to you in all capital letters is writing to a dead legal fiction.
So do I have a legal fiction?
A legal fiction was created when your mother informed the state or the Registrar General that there was a new vessel in town when you were birthed. So you have a birth certificate just like a ship.
Now, a birth certificate is spelled B-I-R-T-H, but we're talking about a berth, as in B-E-R-T-H, which is where you would moor a boat. Is that correct?
Correct. Now, your mother had a birth canal,
right?
Just like a ship.
Okay, so
I think you could say that beyond reasonable doubt that the legal fiction is classified as a vessel, and as we now understand, is floating on the sea of commerce.
So I'm an actor in commerce.
Yes, you have a legal fiction which allows you to operate in commerce, and it was created when your mother and father registered you and got a birth certificate from the Registrar General.
But they didn't know anything about this, right?
They didn't know anything about it. They just thought that they were doing the same thing as happened before in the 18th century and before, where people would go to the church and ask the priest or the vicar to give them a slip of paper and put them into the local registry in the church and give them a copy for their own Holy Bible at home.
So when did this change over?
In about 1837, when the Births, Deaths and Marriages Act and the post of Registrar General came into being, and his job was to collect all of the records from all the churches.
Now, the word regus I find very interesting, because register comes from regus. That means the Queen.
Absolutely.
Or the Crown. So that would actually mean that children are property of the Crown. Is that correct?
The legal fictions are indeed.
So does that have any ramifications for our viewers?
Well, the Registrar General holds everybody in custody.
So essentially everyone that is a UK citizen, registered with a passport, national insurance number, etc., is essentially in custody.
That's right.
But being in custody typically is something that you think of as the police doing when you've done something wrong. But that doesn't necessarily mean that custody in the way that you're using it is a bad thing.
No, the creation of the legal entity, sometimes known as a straw man or a straw party, allows men and women, one, to function in commerce, and two, to accept the benefit privileges provided by the state.
What kind of things
such
are
as national health insurance, national insurance, the dole, clothes, food, heat.
Right.
No, we don't enjoy nothing about being me and you, but we like the idea of making it better, but we just can't be bothered. So what more can we do? Yes, we like the idea. I don't enjoy you.
A corporate entity is a benefit privilege to the straw man or to that legal fiction.
So what we're actually talking about is that we are in custody, we don't know that we have a legal fiction, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, because the majority of the people in this country and everybody that operates this system worldwide under the International Monetary Fund, we hope that the vast majority of people are fed, sheltered and watered. But unfortunately, as we start seeing these systems break down and not operate to the benefits of the people, this is where things start going wrong.
Fine, so it's entirely possible that these systems have changed over the years and become more draconian and unfair against men and women.
Like myself and Vincent will say, the system itself is neutral and can be operated for the benefits of men and women. It all depends on the level of education of the men and women in society and who is pulling the levers. Absolutely.
That's an important point. We still have legally elected representatives. The system that we're operating in is just not the same system that we understand it to be. It's a parallel system, and we have to understand exactly who we are as individuals and how we can operate in this system, and that's what we're going to be looking out for throughout the show with Vincent and also with Dominic.
There we cannot face the Lord. So I hope that you find what it is you're looking for. Yes, I hope that you find what it is you're looking for.
The City of London is renowned worldwide for being a centre for markets. Now, markets is where merchants work. So there's mercantile law. Now, mercantile law is based on admiralty. So if we look around us, particularly here in the city, we can find a great deal of symbols that relate to admiralty.
'Cause you are beautiful to me, I can't deny. See, there are some things that we cannot face alone. So I hope that you find what it is you're looking for.
We're still here in the city-state of London, but we've just taken a short walk from Pudding Lane, down King William Street in fact, to the Bank of England. Now Dominic, the Bank of England is quite an important piece to understand in all of this, because surely this is the People's Bank, isn't it?
Well, we believe it was the People's Bank in 1946 when it was taken from private hands, allegedly, into the public. But unfortunately, as it says in the statutes, the shareholders from private Bank of England did a one-to-one stock swap with the new bank. So the private shareholders are still the public, are the shareholders of the public bank.
So on the news, we're forever hearing about the Bank of England and how it's going to be issuing currency and doing things for the people of the United Kingdom. So is this actually our bank?
Well, the building might be the People's Bank of England, but in 1946, when it was taken into the public, there was a one-to-one stock swap with the private shareholders from the private Bank of England. Therefore, even though the bank building itself might be in public hands, the shareholders, of whom I've yet to find a list, are private.
So you're saying that where we are at the moment is that the Bank of England serves interests other than those of the people of the United Kingdom, i.e. a list of potential investors whose names remain private?
It could well be, Adrian. And if you look at the definition of the word "of," in a legal dictionary, it can also mean without.
So that means the bank without England.
Correct.
What does that actually mean?
Well, it would appear that the Bank of England behaves in the same manner that the Federal Reserve does, which is known to be a private bank that issues private currency.
So if an organisation is issuing private currency, the interest that it puts on it, where does that actually go?
Well, that's a question for another day, Adrian, because I think it might create too much controversy. But, we can talk about that at a later time.
Absolutely. So the currency that's issued by the Bank of England, which at the moment is the sole organisation able to issue currency in this country, is that backed by anything like gold? I mean, this is a pretty substantial building.
It used to be backed by gold until about 1914, where you could go in and take a £5 note or a £10 note into the Bank of England and have it redeemed by gold or silver coin.
The 1914 is quite an important historical date because it's the start of the First World War.
Well, I don't enjoy you, and you know you don't enjoy me. We know we don't enjoy nothing about being me and you, but we like the idea.
Well, the statute that put that in place happened on the first day of World War I.
So is that another diversion similar to the Great Fire of London?
It would appear so.
Right, so up until that date I would have been able to take in a £5 note and get £5 worth of gold or silver coins.
Yes, or a certificate for it.
And nowadays if I go in there and take a £5 note in there, what will they give me back?
A £5 note.
And what's that backed on? What's that backed with?
Well, if it's not backed by gold or silver, then the only thing that it can be backed by is the population's labour, past, present and future, which is represented by your birth certificate. We as a population have been pledged to the IMF as the surety to pay back the creditors in the global bankruptcy.
That's an interesting point that you know. You say global bankruptcy, so are you suggesting that we are bankrupt?
Men and women are not bankrupt. Men
Right.
and women are the only source of credit, but the public is bankrupt and all the corporations are bankrupt.
What event brought about this bankruptcy?
Well, bankruptcy for this country has been going on since we started going to war and colonising everywhere. But bankruptcy can be brought on by world wars, by catastrophes, or by writing large numbers of bonds as sureties for banks.
Is that something that's been happening recently?
About 63 trillion of them.
63 trillion pounds or dollars?
Dollars.
So the currency that gets issued at the Bank of England, if it's not backed by gold or silver, does that mean that we, standing here, are actually the treasure?
Absolutely. We are the gold.
So how does that play out in terms of our debts and all of the things that are happening around us?
Well, for instance, I think we're having the Olympic Games here in 2012 in London.
That's absolutely right.
And the last time I looked, the government didn't have any money. So what does it do? It issues some bonds or some treasury bills or some treasury notes or some treasury bonds, which are bought by investors. And that money goes back into the economy in order to pay for the people to build the National Stadium, for instance, the Olympic Stadium.
So we're paying for the Olympic Games.
Of course we are. And some people say that wouldn't be a bad thing. But unfortunately, you're paying taxes for the privilege of using somebody else's currency and paying back the principal and the interest on the original loan that was given against the treasury bonds, the treasury bills and the treasury notes. So when So ultimately, when the Olympic Stadium has been built, the men and women of Britain have used their own resources to build a stadium that doesn't belong to them, and paid the privilege, the principal and the interest on the original loan, plus the taxes for the privilege of using somebody else's fiat monetary system.
There's a lot of information there that you've just mentioned. Let me just break that down a little bit. So what you're actually saying is that a private corporation will actually own the Olympic Stadium. A private corporation will be responsible for the running of the Olympic Games and will be able to sell commercial rights, yet we the people are actually the ones that own it and that should be profiting from that.
But even if we did own it, you've still paid the principal and the interest back to the people that originally bought the Treasury bonds and the Treasury bills that were sold by the Bank of England in order to raise the money.
That's quite an interesting perspective on things. Why is it that this information is not more readily available in the public?
Because we don't get time. And our education system doesn't furnish people with this information readily.
Where can viewers that are watching this get more information about these kind of subjects?
Well, we'll give you a list and a few PowerPoint slides that you can put up on.
Fantastic, that would be great.
All the references that we covered today will be available through your TV program.
Are you planning on doing any talks or presentations about this in the future?
Well, we've been running presentations, not just about the historical perspective and how this system was put in place, but giving people practical solutions about how they can operate as a creditor in the bankruptcy.
Yeah, I think that's something that we'll be looking at a little bit later in the show. Thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Adrian.
So we've just taken a little bus ride now from where we were, outside the Bank of England, down towards the Old Bailey. The reason for this is, where you have commerce and where you have money, you also need justice. And I think that Vinny's going to be able to tie a few of these things together. So can you tell us a little bit about the way that the judiciary works, in particular with regard to the straw man and to the man? Because I'm a little bit confused by that, as I'm sure some viewers would be.
Glad you've asked that question. I think really it's very important to kind of round off and clarify what Dominic has just said, because the judicial system will not make sense to most people unless you can understand the bankruptcy.
Well, most people actually study for years in order to act as a solicitor or a lawyer or a barrister. So, you know, I would understand what you're saying. But in terms of bankruptcy, that's something completely new.
Yes, because the way the court system is designed, and where a lot of people will get it wrong, is when they start not to accept the bankruptcy. So you have to accept it, which, for example, when you get a claim, and remember, Dominic hinted that we are in reality the creditors, we have to accept the claim, to accept the summons.
So wait a minute, we are the creditors in the global bankruptcy, therefore the public owes us money.
And there is an obligation for us to settle any liability that has been created. So all you can do is to accept the bankruptcy. Now, one of the things that I first kind of noticed when I was starting off and studying and watching barristers in action, that wherever possible they would always put a not guilty plea onto the record for their whoever they were representing. So, for example, when you start looking at the bankruptcy and realizing that we are operating in admiralty, which we are, then if you put in a plea of not guilty, you are dishonouring the bankruptcy. So you, the straw man, yet the legal fiction is always guilty.
So why is it that barristers don't actually tell us that we need to plead guilty and accept any claim against us for value?
Well, unfortunately or fortunately, barristers and solicitors make a living by causing controversy. So by putting in a not guilty plea, you are causing a controversy, yeah, and then you become liable for the case.
Is controversy, as you're using it, a legal term?
Well, perhaps a better way to explain it is to look at it honour and dishonour. Yeah?
That's an interesting...
Yeah,
we don't hear about this ever.
So to remain in honour, you have to accept the claim and you have to settle the liability. And by not accepting their offer, their summons, or pleading not guilty, then you are in dishonour. So they're going to use that dishonour against you. Honestly, it's really as simple as that.
So if I get taken to court and somebody has a claim against me, the very best thing that I can do is to remain in honour and accept their claim. What happens then? So if I get taken to court and somebody has a claim against me, the very best thing that I can do is to remain in honour and accept their claim. What happens then?
Accept, however, you don't want to accept everything, but you obviously want to put some condition to that. So for example, sir, I accept what the good gentleman has just said on proof of claim and proof of loss. So they're making you an offer. Yeah, you're accepting their offer and then returning their offer to them. So they're trying to give you liability, look at it as a hot potato, and you are accepting that hot potato and saying, you can have the liability, thank you very much.
So what happens to you in that case that you've done that?
Well, in simple terms, for example, in a magistrate case, if you can work it correctly, it doesn't go to trial, it stays on the civil side.
What does that mean?
Well, in reality, there may be some kind of fine or something like that, but I would rather deal with a fine than have to spend some time at Her Majesty's pleasure. But, I mean, it's not as simple as that, but that's basically the nuts and bolts. So when you go into court, it's all about, are you going to accept their claim because you are the creditor? Whether you know that or not is irrelevant, okay? Because you're accepting all these lovely benefit privileges. And you have a fiduciary duty to settle any liability that is created by the straw man, the legal fiction. And the legal fiction is always guilty.
Tell me about the hierarchy, because I think that's quite an interesting point in terms of where legal fictions are in relation to the government, for example, or perhaps, more interesting than that, to men and women, because I noticed that Dominic was being very careful to talk about men and women as a different point than people, i.e. the person.
Yeah, I mean, men and women, that's me and you if we're on the private side, yeah, the real flesh and blood. But every time you go into the public, you need to have what's called a false mask, a Scotty dog, you know, to play on the Monopoly board.
Right.
So, for example, a magistrate court and a county court is geared up purely for that Scotty dog.
So they're dealing with your legal fiction. They're not dealing with your flesh and blood.
Yes, and the legal fiction, as we know, is always guilty. It's their creation. It's their corporation. It's only when you start going higher up into the Queen's Bench, in the High Court, in the Chancery, then the real man and woman can appear. But the problem is when you start operating in a certain venue as the real man and woman, that will cause controversy. And controversy is something that we're trying to avoid in their court, in their system.
The name court is actually quite interesting. Usually you play a game on a court, don't
Correct.
you?
Yeah, and honestly, it is just a game, and you have to treat it as a game, and it's just business. So getting very emotional in there, and I know it can be a very stressful experience, is not going to help you resolve the matter.
So what we see on television with courtroom dramas that's actually misinformation.
It's
if you like.
misinformation, and it's not correct. And you'll only understand that when you start to take on board and study what Dominic has been saying. That in the public, if we're operating in bankruptcy and we are receiving a benefit privilege of that bankruptcy, then you are in dishonour when you don't settle any liability.
So is there anything else that we need to know when we're dealing with all of these complex subjects?
Yes, caution. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of study to be able to use some of the tools that we've mentioned.
It's not a quick fix or
It's
a get rich.
Definitely not. And just by signing a piece of paper, it doesn't mean that your problem will go away. You have to be prepared to stand under the process and understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. And if one tool doesn't work, you need to be able to reach into that toolbox and grab the next appropriate tool.
How would you be able to do that? I mean, most people aren't confident enough to represent themselves, let alone do self-study about these things.
Well, I would suggest maybe attending one of our seminars or to study an individual called Winston Schreidt, who in our opinion is the cleanest source of this information.
So Winston Schreidt holds this basically title by having done all the research and gone through the legal processes, and he's actually got proof that these do work.
Yes.
Is it correct that Winston's actually going to be holding a seminar here in London?
Yeah, I'm glad you've mentioned that. He's holding a seminar on the 12th and 13th of September opposite the Houses of Parliament.
Opposite the Houses of Parliament? Did you choose that on purpose?
Actually, it was chosen for us, but who knows? I'm sure it was chosen for the right reason.
Excellent. Okay. Well, if you'd like some more information about that seminar that will be taking place in London on the 12th and 13th, you will find the details of that on our website, but also on the Standing in Commerce website, which is www.standingincommerce.org.uk. So do check this out. It's a once in a year or a couple of years opportunity, because Winston hasn't been to the UK so far to speak.
Tonight, live your life. I want you to be with me tonight.
Today is essentially that our money is backed only by the value of our labour. Now that's an important point, because it means we can't exchange it fairly for gold or silver as would have been the case in the past. Interestingly, following on from that, we actually have a thing called a straw man, or a legal fiction, which is our name when it's written in block capitals. That is something that doesn't belong to us. It's created and kept in custody by the Registrar General. So essentially, that means that our legal fiction, which most of us believe to be the same as our flesh and blood, can be taken to court. And when we find ourselves in court, we're actually automatically guilty. We're guilty by decree. That's the way that it's set up. So this earth-shattering information needs to be navigated in some way. We need to find ways of educating ourselves and learning about this. So if you are interested in further information about this and using instruments with which you're going to be able to look after yourselves, then I can think of no better way than to going to a seminar that is hosted by none other than somebody like Vic or also Dominic.
All those times that you need what you said about him. Didn't you feel no shame at all? I admit I was foolish.
We've presented to you a range of the problems. In fact, what we've actually told you is we've given you a clue as to who you really are. And that means that you're not your straw man. There is a difference between who you are as an individual and who you are in terms of when you go to court or when you're taking part in commerce. So now it's time to have a look at some of the solutions. So what do you suggest that we have a look at in terms of solutions when we have these kind of problems, where we have liabilities or issues such as this? What do we need to do? Dominic, would you like to answer that one first?
Well, first of all, there are a range of tools, we call tools or instruments, that can be used and issued in a particular process, or sets of processes that can be used to unpick your particular problem. It does unfortunately take a bit of time to understand all of those.